If we are in the districts, same thing. So we want to think about like what's our reality? Where's that reality situated in this idea of civic engagement? And then how do I become more informed so that I can inform others as it relates to civic engagement? The second is developmental networks. And this is the idea of having mentors and sponsors. Now, I've done a lot of research around developmental networks and developmental relationships, and most people who deal with mentoring can't tell you the functions of mentoring. There are two functions. One is going to be career related, the other is going to be psychosocial. If we're talking about youth, their career related function is primarily dealing with academic achievement, right? So if you think about mentoring in those look at mentoring through those two lenses, we have to make sure that we are signaling, we are inviting, we are managing, and we are maintaining relationships with mentors that are able to fulfill those functions for us. They need to be able to help us with our careers. They need to be able to help us with our psychosocial concerns, right? The difference between a mentor and a sponsor is mentors are more like advisors, right? They are able to help you make meaning of some things, to think through some things, and they're able to address, those career-related and psychosocial functions. Sponsors are decision makers. They're able to pull the trigger. Sponsors are able to call and say, hey, Dr. Yendo Hoppy, when is Rudy's first day of work? Not, can he apply for the job that you just posted in the College of Education and Human Services, but when is his first day? And we definitely need sponsors with decision-making power at the table. On Monday, I called some of them abolitionist allies, because in this work, race plays a critical role in terms of civic engagement. And if we look at the top of any institution, more than likely there is a white male, right? And that's because by human nature, we all practice what is called homosocial reproduction, or homophily. So we have to learn how to communicate across that metaphorical border of difference called race. The second point I'd like to make as it relates to developmental networks is we have to bring something to the table. We cannot have a relationship with a mentor and it's a one-way street where we're asking. We need to be able to contribute to their bottom line. I like to call it line 49. What is in this relationship for them? And I think when we're signaling these mentoring and sponsorship relationships, we have to make sure that that's a factor in the equation. What am I bringing to the table to help my mentor, right, navigate and negotiate the space that they're in? So we need to bring some value to the relationship, and there's a bi-directional transfer of relationship. And then diversity. We want to diversify our developmental networks, and we want to do that based on age. So it needs to be intergenerational. We need to do that based on race. We need to do that based on profession. We need to do that based on philosophical alignment. So we don't want the same perspectives. We don't want to self-medicate. We don't want the ideas that we share with each other to be monolithic. So it's very important that we diversify those developmental networks. And then advocacy. We want to build an informed bench. And for the most part, I think on this call are educators, right? And when we think about building a bench, I think students should be the units of concern here. And with those students, we want to build capacity in them so that they're able to better engage in civic engagement. And that takes me to my second point. I don't think we have done as good of a job as we should have with informing youth of what civic engagement is, what civic engagement looks like for them, and how should they be preparing themselves to participate in the political process. So my third point is the capacity building and leadership development. We have to uplift youth voice. Earlier, Dr. Oliver with TCC, she mentioned She talked about storytelling and digital stories, and I think that's a social technology that we absolutely can use to inform our youth about civic engagement through cross-generational relationships. And out of the Center for Urban Education and Policy, we do a lot of that. As a matter of fact, we have what we call a Sankofa narrative project, where we have youth actually interviewing more elders in terms of what race and racism look like, right? And what race and racism looks like today. So those are the 3 points. And then I had Roxy. Were we able to get Chris and?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So
let me make sure they are. Camille, can you make sure that Dr. Jansen and Rodney are both unmuted? I think that they are. Let's read it.
So as demonstrative evidence of developmental networks, I've invited 2 of my mentors, sponsors, and dear friends to share in some conversation and possibly demonstrate how this idea of developmental networks work. And I first would like to introduce you to Dr. Chris Jansen. He is the director in the Center for Urban Education and Policy at the University of North Florida, a associate professor in the Leadership, School Counseling, Sport Management Department. And so he's in school counseling, but a lot of his connoisseurship is centered around collective leadership and community. So Chris, could you talk a little bit about how community and collective leadership lends itself to this idea of civic engagement for youth?
Sure. First of all, thank you everyone for creating this incredible space. I've heard such amazing things about the learning that's gone on here the past number of days, and no surprise knowing the organizers and many of the participants here. So yeah, collective leadership is a passion of mine, and I think the one thing that I learned early on was it was something later that I explored through literature, through what other people had written about it. But first and foremost, I learned about it from people who practiced it. And one thing that I've always loved about approaches to collective leadership is that it's not some newfangled way to lead in communities and organizations, but rather it's probably the original form or value system that undergirded how human beings in all indigenous communities worked and practiced together. That the things we associate now with leadership are really distorted, totally myopic views and perspectives that were originated from mostly white men, because so much of our leadership theory and models came from this trait factor approach. So in contrast to this idea of the great man theory of leaders, or Superman or Wonder Woman that you hear those phrases in academic or educational settings, this is in both a critique and a disruption of it, but it's also, I think, more powerfully than that, it's a counter model. And to me, I think the idea of collective leadership is important for a number of reasons. One is it helps us think through what our civic responsibilities and obligations, and also rights and agency and power lie. So to me, the idea of collective leadership is essential to teaching youth civic engagement, because it's practicing democracy in action. It's the idea that we have choice, that we have agency, and that working collectively, we learn more about the nature of the challenges that we face in an ongoing way. It's also just a reading of the realities of how change works. So change, most frequently, true transformational change is almost invariably due to collective efforts of what Miles Horton would call extraordinary, ordinary people. And the idea that together we can make changes is a scary story for those who are subject and probably in need of that kind of transformational change. So, you know, a lot of histories in our community, Northeastern Florida, have been systematically either obscured or not told. They're very dangerous to people. It's what Michelle Fine might even call a dangerous narrative. And I think those stories are dangerous because they really hold the social and narrative DNA for how we can confront our challenges today. You know, I don't think it's an accident, and I know Rodney would say that it most certainly is not, that a powerful story like the 1960 lunch counter sit-ins in Jacksonville, in which he was one of the co-leaders, is surprisingly unknown by local residents here who may have lived here all their lives. But that story in itself has all those examples of all these different tenets of what I understand collective leadership to be. You know, this idea that intergenerational partnerships are essential, that learning and leading is really about social processes. It's about relationships. And our relationships are deepened and extended through the stories that we have, the stories that we hold about ourselves, the stories that we hold about our communities. The idea of collective leadership also deeply honors place and the people living in places. So that's a tough thing, especially for academics sometimes to understand. Universities are notorious for stepping into communities where they think they have solutions to problems that really the community members don't even recognize. We come in with questions that we want to explore, maybe even answers to questions that the community doesn't have. You know, another important element to this, I think especially now, is how we're intentional about crossing boundaries. I know that for my own racial cultural development, at a certain point, I think there's only so much that white people can learn in predominantly white spaces. Yeah, it's like a feedback loop that's not going to lead or introduce us to new ways of thinking about the world and even thinking about thinking. And it's also really, I think, built around this idea that the truest kind of reflection of a community are our hopes and our ideas and aspirations for change, and those really should be local. So collective leadership to me is a way to both dismantle and offer a counterexample for how our organizations and communities can be healthier.
I like it. Hey, so Chris, you mentioned transformational change, right? What role, why do you think African-American history is so important when you talk about that transformational change as it relates to civic engagement? And also, why are cross-racial relationships so critical in this process?
Yeah. Well, you know, so if one of the ideas behind this idea of collective leadership, one of the axioms is this idea that hope and change are built on the assets and dreams of local people and the communities that they live in, that we live in. And I believe that our stories are the richest of our assets. That's why we try to explore them very purposefully, like through the center. You know, the story that we've been hearing a lot. We've only been hearing one part though lately in the news, with the idea that there's going to be this bizarre, strange convergence of Trump giving this acceptance speech at the RNC in Jacksonville on the very day that Axe Handle Saturday is commemorated and took place. You know, really, I think is a good example. The fact that the media only talks about Axe Handle Saturday, I think, is interesting, because, and I guess that's our role then collectively as a community, is how do we help position the storytellers like Rodney Hurst, who not only tells the story, but he lived it, he designed it, he co-created it. By his action and by his courage and the courage and action of so many other, mostly African-American youth who are engaged in that process. That history to me has been and has become, ever since Rudy and Dr. Jameson and Rodney Hurst introduced it to me, that's really what we've situated almost all of our work out of the Center for Urban Education and Policy around, because all the ingredients are there. All the kind of, it's like a master curriculum. You know, it's this story about youth-adult partnerships, how adults in the community, starting first and foremost with Rutledge Pearson, how Rutledge Pearson demonstrated such uncommon courage to say, I'm not going to teach, you know, this, as Rodney would say, incomplete and dishonest history. We're gonna really go to the source of where it is honest, where it's courageous, and that's, let's talk to people who are experiencing now the challenges that the history books won't even mention in 1956 or 57, when Rodney would have been in Mr. Pearson's class. But then when the sit-ins started, you know, the idea of mass meetings where adults and youth in the Black community in Jacksonville would come together with the express purpose of supporting these young activists and nurturing their leadership. You know, as we've learned, Rudy and I, from Mr. Hurst, from Rodney, and Charlie Cobb, other of our elders in the movement, that the civil rights movement was and currently is and always will be about youth leadership development. And so that story is in such rich abundance here. You know, the idea that these sit-ins, unlike many places in the South where they were led by courageous college students, often affiliated with SNCC, here it was high school students. You know, and so for those public educators in the room, and I know there's many of you, and those who are huge advocates for the idea and the promise of public education, there it is. Public education in the form of an inspired eighth grade social studies teacher, enlivening and activating the political imaginations of all of these youth in the community, who then decided that, you know, we are going to put our education into practice. We're gonna activate these relationships by challenging the institutions and the processes of white supremacist ideology. I mean, what a gift for our community to explore. I see other parts of that story that I'm gonna continue to explore. You know, the idea that there was this kind of strange white guy who comes in from Tallahassee, a non-traditional undergraduate student, because he was a bit older already at the time. I think Rodney can correct me. I think he was like 24. But I've learned lessons from really exploring that aspect of what Richard Parker was and how he engaged collectively in that process. Richard Parker didn't try to come in and assume the lead. He listened, he learned, he was kind of in the periphery. Now that's not, as Rodney will tell you, that's not what the press wanted to believe. That's not what white people wanted to believe. They immediately went to the racist paradigm that he, this outside agitator, must be behind this. You know, that this couldn't possibly be the collective mind and intention and political savviness and courage of young Black youth. But, you know, I think that idea of whether it's abolitionist allies or whatever the terminology that we're gonna use, collective leadership, we're going back to that, has helped inform me that my role as a white man is to magnify and create opportunities for other voices that have been systematically neglected to be heard in more profound ways, not only by asking who's at the table and who's not, and challenging my mostly white colleagues at the University of North Florida to really wrestle and contend with that, but to demand, you know, that there's more than representation, that there are a recognition of community gifts. So those stories, that powerful story of the sit-ins, is really what we situate our entire programming around. You know, our bar for what is a powerful educator is not just somebody, and this is great in and of itself, but it's not just somebody who nurtures the development and change in individuals in her classroom or his classroom through a way that's culturally honoring and sustaining, but it also holds the potential to change communities. Like I would argue from my reading of this rich history in Northeastern Florida, that the arc was bent during 1960 and really probably before that, because of Rutledge Pearson's teaching and leadership and mentoring, that the arc was bent more toward justice and equity, and that was due to powerful Black youth. You know, that's the story of and so what else in the subsequent years have we missed? Have we as a broader community, because those voices of our powerful young Black women and Black men have been minimized or suppressed, oppressed, and when we look at it, if we're going to give an honest read of what makes this community vibrant and powerful and beautiful, it's in the stories, particularly the stories within Black neighborhoods, Black communities, and our civil rights history. So, you know, the idea of racial relationships is a little bit of a pivot point. You know, we have to cross boundaries, and we have to, I think, in that process, now that everybody, and by everybody I mean white people, are finally recognizing, oh wow, we should be having these conversations. You know, it's an ideal time to not just have those conversations, but really explore the tensions and dynamics when people, especially Black folks and white folks, are getting together to talk about racism. I think at this point, if we just jump in, some of the old patterns and dynamics can be formed. You know, so and that's a dangerous thing. My caution over the past month and well before that for a lot of my white brothers and sisters who want to engage in this kind of work is really thinking about how there is a tension between the realities I know from my own self, that I've learned so much and I've grown so much because of being in relationship with men and women of color. So Dr. Sophie Philibert, Dr. Rudy Jameson, you know, Elder Rodney Hurst, we've gotten to a point where our relationships, and it takes work, it takes time, but they're trusting enough where they can challenge me in the moment, in real time. They can detect something that I do that represents that old paradigm of the white male hierarchy, and so the idea of white privilege is a tricky, sneaky thing, because I think for many of us as white people, even if we have great intentions, we may even be practicing from a space that we think is social justice oriented, but if we're doing that, for example, where we believe we're advocating for rather than with people, if we're actually thinking that we're speaking on the behalf of others who are not anywhere close from the cultural framework that we're coming from, that's that same dynamic again. So we might have best interest, we might have good intent, but if our process, if our relationships are imbalanced and not inequitable, then the ends are going to be really the outcomes that you can't get to a good place in a bad way. And, you know, and so there is a tension there that for me, the men and women of the Brotherhood, the Eastside Brotherhood, have taught me so much. But what really taught me a lot was the trust. The very first time I was ever there at the Eastside Brotherhood, which is a social club started by Black longshoremen along A. Philip Randolph, where that mural is placed right behind Dr. Jameson. So I remember the first time Rudy bringing me there socially, and, you know, watching him create the conditions for people to invite me in when they had no reason to trust me. So I watched as Rudy circulated for about 2 hours that night, basically convincing people or trying to explain that I'm not a cop. And we shared that story about a year ago in an area church out east, and Pastor Harry, Bishop Harry now, was like, and some people still aren't convinced. I guess I got that cop look.
Right.
But I've learned so much from being a white man in Black spaces. But at the same time, the tension is those Black spaces aren't there for my development. So I think that's going to be a real tension right now, because there's a lot of white people who I think we're believing that we can just flip a switch and we can move to this idea of systemic racism and understanding that racism is systemic and structural. And it's not a light switch. It's going to be a tough, painful journey for white folks. And I'm not saying that we're the ones who should be thought about as vulnerable in this situation. We're not. We're much less vulnerable in this world, as we know. But there is going to be a task. There is going to be we have to give things up. I have to give up my idea that because of whatever I've been able to accomplish, that it's only been due to my rugged good looks and intellect and sense of hard work. It's not. It's not. It's largely, a good part of that is due because the system is stacked to see me as a director, as a leader, as a tenured professor. So there's all that privilege I have to let go of. There's the idea that this is a meritocracy, you know, because that supports my notion that I worked and earned every bit of this. And conversely, people who haven't achieved, that's because they haven't worked hard enough. So I have to disrupt that. For I think many of us as white people, we have to reinvestigate, reinvigorate, reimagine our relationship with this country. So if patriotism is this country can do no wrong, or we might have flaws, but still at the same time, we have to, you know, it's the best thing out there. It's exceptional. No, I think we have to have an honest rendering with that. We have to have a different relationship. It demands a different relationship with people of color. So if I believe that racism is systemic and structural, that doesn't allow for me just to say, well, I'm not racist. I'm not the one committing that act. I'm not the one who prevented that person from being hired, although they were the most qualified. It's not enough anymore. That if you truly believe as a white person that racism is structural and systemic, and you're a person of faith, especially whatever that faith tradition, you have a moral obligation then to disrupt it, to be anti-racist. And that you can't do that as a hobby. You can't be a social justice hobbyist. Like that's a lifestyle then. And that lifestyle means that you're gonna now you might face some of the things to a small degree that your Black friends, your brown friends have been experiencing all along. Questions about whether you really support the organization because you might see some things that need to be shifted and changed. You know, people wondering if you're, I remember early on, somebody I know many of you in this room know, Dr. Pritchie Smith, who's been a white mentor of mine. And I remember early on him drawing me aside and saying, hey, Jansen, people are gonna, when's the last time somebody's called you a sellout to white people? And I'm like, what? Is that gonna be, you know, and then he's like, well, listen for it. This is what it sounds like. It sounds like somebody saying repeatedly, the questions Dr. Jameson and I often get at the center is, you're too focused on Black youth, on Black educators, on Black communities. There's all other kinds of diversity. Why are you just focused on that? You know, and so we've learned to be able to talk about the fact that like here, you know, the history of oppression in this country and in this region, in this community, is centered around an anti-Black agenda that emerges from a white supremacist ideology. There's also the contextual realization that in Duval County, the plurality of students are Black. We also have to wrestle with the fact that UNF puts the predominantly white institution. And the most underrepresented voices still are Black. So if Rudy and I were doing this work in South Texas and we were only unilaterally focused on Black folks, yeah, maybe then it would be a little strange. But like, to me, that question always reflected a couple things. An inability to recognize the systemic and structural racism that originated in a white supremacist ideology that created that dichotomy of white and Black, which nobody can discuss and share more than Rodney Hurst. So it's been through these amazing experiences, which are relationships. You know, I'm so humbled it's hard to think about this without my heart like really being activated. I get emotional every time, but the relationships with Rodney, with Rudy, with so many others, with Tamara, have taught me so much about who I am and in different ways that I can learn and lead. And it's been through those relationships where they can check me, and you know they do. And for me, it's also trying to be better attentive. I'm so glad that when Dr. Jameson was telling me about the mindfulness practices that you've been leading, Dr. Gibson, I think that's so critically important for this kind of work as a white person, because the more in tune you can be, the more mindful you can be about your inner responses to things. I think that's just so essential, because I can recognize the hotness, the emotion, the tension when something is rubbing up against my privilege. And the more I can hear that voice, the more I can feel like, oh, but I shouldn't be challenged. I'm doing this work. Then I know I've got more work to do. But the more I can be in tune with that, it only comes through practice in a disciplined way. Because I think a lot of us as white people, we're almost taught we can go through life without being reflective, like bowls in a cultural china shop. I feel like I'm coining all these phrases today. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity, and I love this venue. I hope to be able to participate more fully in it next year.
Yeah. So Chris, I think we had a few questions for you. Roxy, can we take two questions, and then we'll shift to Rodney?
Okay, let me see. So I guess I should go in order. How does collective leadership work? And was that you, Dr. Jameson, or how is it implemented?
No.
That wasn't, okay. Mr. Jansen, how can you discuss with groups such as white women, for example, who say they have also experienced systematic and structural discrimination and they aren't complaining or protesting? Do you understand the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there aren't going to be any easy answers. And I think
Okay.
I do want to say that too. I would be very suspicious right now, and I am suspicious in this moment, of anybody who says, this is the recipe, these are the answers. I think we have to stop ourselves from moving like super quickly into this resolution, as white people especially. I think we have to sit and wrestle with the realities and the complexities. Yeah, I think we should be asking more questions than anything else. I think those are the things that I'd be curious about with those white women. How fully do they know our national, our local, our regional, and even their own personal histories?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That I think as white people, we also give ourselves a pass of not exploring fully our own stories and our own situatedness. I mean, a good example, I spent my high school and junior high years in a small college town in mid-Michigan, maybe inappropriately named Mount Pleasant. It wasn't always so pleasant for I think many people. And I was recently talking to a friend of mine who engages in some of this work too, who grew up just down the road in Midland, where Dow Chemical is. And we were talking about the richness of the stories in Jacksonville, and how they so powerfully express like both the horrors of white supremacist ideology and how it oppresses and has oppressed, and also the hope of people who have worked together to resist it. And at one point, I almost very quickly said, well, we didn't have these kind of stories in Mount Pleasant. And before I could finish, excuse my language, Dr. Jim Garrett was like, that's bullshit. Like, there was a big tribal population in our communities. And then it pops up, and I realized, wow, I haven't explored my own history as a teenager, growing up in a place where the Native American Chippewa tribe was so maligned, so abused, that like when I moved there from suburban Detroit, there were kids who literally called Native American people wagon burners, but somehow I conveniently forgot about that. And so I see somebody shout out Battle Creek in Kalamazoo. I mean, so you think about like, that's also an interesting thing. Michigan is a super segregated space. So I think for those white women, I think a couple things. I mean, if they get to a certain point of readiness to be in conversation with others who have experienced considerably more oppression, because they walk in a room and, you know, if you a person of color, and I think the readiness is marked by, can you do what I need to do right now? Shut up and listen. Can you humble yourself to hear somebody else's story, seeking to understand and not kick back with your own, whoa, 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 but I've experienced this too. Because I think what that does is like undermine like the shared experience. It's more, I think that's going to happen a lot now. We're going to see this, that people are engaging in these conversations in a real performative way. I want to be seen that I'm doing this, but I'm not really doing it. So I can talk more offline about it's more of a conversation than recommendations.
Yeah, let's Roxy, let's shift to Rodney. So Rodney Hurst, at 16 years old, led the 1960 sit-ins here in Jacksonville, Florida, as the president of the NAACP Youth Council, and he's authored a few books. His first was "It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke," which recounts those experiences of the 1960s. His second is "Unless We Tell It, It Never Gets Told." His third is "Never Forget Who You Are, Conversations About Racism and Identity Development." He's an author, historian, and a civil rights activist. He's a true friend, mentor, and sponsor for me. Rodney Hurst, you call American history that is taught particularly in public schools incomplete, dishonest, and racist. Can you talk a little bit about that and talk about why it's so important for African history, African American history, and civil rights history be embedded in the curriculum for our youth today?
Thank you, Rudy, and thank you, Ms. Hall and Ms. Wilson, and to this distinguished panel of educators and respected persons from the community. American history is incomplete, dishonest, and racist. And we serve that education.
No, I was just emailing you, telling you, okay, so no, that's what
what's happening? Somebody was talking?
You good, go ahead.
Okay. And we serve that education, that incomplete, dishonest, and racist education up to our young people as tasteless and blandless baby food, and we expect them to eat it up as gourmet food, and they do. Because American history, as we teach it, not only is incomplete and racist, but it's a big lie. It is misrepresented, and some of us, those of us who are educators, don't have the courage and the bravery to call it out for what it is. When we deal with slavery, that uncomfortable subject that we don't like to talk about, and we don't like to talk about it because in this country, white folk, with a wink, a nod, and turn and look the other way from white Christian leaders, if you will, decided the best way to get around considering Africans and Blacks as humans with warm blood coursing through their veins is to refer to them as property or chattel. So if you think of me as a chair or a table, then you don't have to worry about violating or confronting the principles of biblical teachings and Jesus Christ if you are Christian. Every religious denomination in this country, when this country was founded, owned slaves. In 1836, Georgetown College, now Georgetown University, founded by Jesuit priests. Jesuit means son of Jesus. They got in trouble in keeping the doors of Georgetown College open, and they sold 272 of their slaves, realizing $115,000 then, which is about $6 million today. Question: why did these Catholic priests, these sons of Jesus, why did they own slaves? Why did the Southern Baptists have a meeting in Augusta, Georgia in 1845 to create something called the Southern Baptist Convention to totally support slavery? Every Ivy League college in this country, the president either owned slaves or slaves worked on their campus. But when we teach it, we don't discuss that, because teaching still requires courage and bravery. Rutledge Pearson, who was my 8th grade American history teacher, told us his 8th grade Negro students in this Negro junior high school, as a part of the Negro division of the Duval County public school system, that textbook approved for American history that only had the name of George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington in the book, he told us to leave it home, because he refused to teach us American history from the racist and slanted viewpoints of historians and textbook authors who did not have any insight about inclusivity. So when I talk to groups, I talk about how they are used. I talk about, we celebrate a holiday, only one of 2 named holidays, for Christopher Columbus. Martin Luther King holiday is the other holiday named for an individual. But we don't teach that Christopher Columbus never landed in the continental United States. The decision to name Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America was a political decision that goes back to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Knights of Columbus and the Italian American delegation that went to see him and ask him to declare Christopher Columbus the discoverer of America in a holiday. We teach that when Christopher Columbus discovered America, there was this, oh great, we welcome you, Christopher Columbus, and we welcome you, indigenous folk. Yet Christopher Columbus took the Tainos on Hispaniola, and he immediately began to enslave them because they didn't have weapons, and he and his men did, sending young girls back to Italy and Spain as sex slaves. Christopher Columbus was the first slave trader in this hemisphere. And his son Diego was the first slave trader of African flesh. But as we proceed in American history, we write about and teach. Paul Revere got on a horse and he rode from Lexington to Concord saying, to arms, the redcoats of the British are coming. That did not happen. We teach that Benjamin Franklin put a key on a kite and flew the kite up into the air, and lightning struck the key, and therefore Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. That did not happen. We teach that Betsy Ross sold the first flag. That did not happen. We hear words like, written by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And while Thomas Jefferson was writing those words, he was the largest slave owner in Albemarle County in Virginia. And he took it even a step further. He owned an enslaved person named Sarah Sally Hemings. And he raped her enough times for her to have 6 children. And I use the term rape because there was no relationship between an enslaved person and the owner of that enslaved person, irrespective of what some historians like to write and how Hollywood portrays the story. Sarah Sally Hemings had her first child when she was 14, which makes Thomas Jefferson a pedophile. It wasn't until 2002, as a result of DNA testing, that the descendants of Sarah Sally Hemings, who were also the descendants of Thomas Jefferson, were allowed to be buried in the cemetery next to Monticello. We talk about Francis Scott Key and this great national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. Francis Scott Key was an elitist. He was a slave owner. In the War of 1812, he became a lieutenant. The British said to slaves and escaped slaves, if you come and fight with us against America, we will not only give you your freedom, but we will give you a place to stay. And they created a division of the British Army called the Colonial Marines, consisting of just slaves and former slaves. And in a battle against Francis Scott Key-led forces, the slaves, the Colonial Marines, these enslaved persons, whipped Francis Scott Key and his American soldiers quite good. A few months later, and smarting from the beating that he took, he went to the British on a British ship, asking them to release one of his friends who had been captured, a Dr. William Beans. And he was on that ship talking to the British when the British fired on Fort McHenry in Baltimore Harbor. And the fort fell to the British. And in the meantime, Francis Scott Key started writing this poem to Fort McHenry. And in the 3rd stanza of the 4 stanzas that he wrote, he talked about how good he felt that these Negro slaves were killed and their blood ran out of their bodies onto the soil, making up for how much they had contaminated and polluted this country. Star-Spangled Banner has everything to do with war, has nothing to do with patriotism. And we get upset with Colin Kaepernick because he knelt in opposition and protesting police brutality and racism. Of our first 18 presidents, 12 owned slaves, and 8 of the 12 owned slaves, enslaved persons when they were serving in the White House. But you won't read about that in an American history textbook. You won't read that George Washington, the so-called father of our country, owned more slaves than any other president. You won't read and you won't hear conversations about these 12 presidents were really racists in presidential clothing. But let's move on. One of my favorite stories, Three Musketeers, and also The Count of Monte Cristo and the Man in the Iron Mask. No one told me in American literature classes that the writer of these 3 great classics, Alexander Dumas, was Black. Nobody told me that the father of Russian literature, Alexander Pushkin, was Black. Nobody told me that John James Audubon, the premier bird expert in the world, the Audubon Society, wherever you would find them, no one told me that he was black. No one told me that the great conqueror Hannibal was black. No one told me that St. Augustine of Hippo, one of the seminal figures in the philosophy of Christianity, was black. No one told me that Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg, the great, great, great grandmother of Queen Elizabeth II, the reigning monarch of England, nobody told me that she was black. And nobody told me that Ludwig von Beethoven was black. Now, what American history did teach me was that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, even though the Bureau of Patents says there are 3,000 inventions during slavery that slaves could not get credit for because they were enslaved persons, that their masters, their slave owners, got credit for those inventions. But when I ask high school students and college students, who was Eli Whitney? Hands go up. In their textbooks, in their history books, they immediately shout out the name, he invented the cotton gin. But when I ask them, who was Daniel Hale Williams? They don't know that he was the first man to perform successful heart surgery, and he was black. They don't know that Charles Drew classified blood plasma and he was black. They don't know that Benjamin Banneker invented the first movable clock and also completed the laying out of Washington, D.C. They don't know that Matt Henson was the first person to set foot on the North Pole. They don't know that Granville Woods invented a device that goes on a train to allow an engineer on one train to know when another train is near. They don't know that Garrett Morgan invented the traffic light, the 3-signal traffic light that included the caution. Traffic lights prior to Garrett Morgan had stop and go. He put the caution in the traffic light, and he also invented the gas masks. They don't know that when we talk about Elijah McCoy, responsible for 45 inventions and 15 inventions having to do with long distance trucking and lubrication, they're not taught that he was black. And when you hear the term the real McCoy, you're talking about Elijah McCoy. All right, Mr. Herschel, as one curriculum supervisor told me in the Duval County school system after a presentation, well, Mr. Herschel, we can't include everyone. And I said to him, why not? If you're going to be selective about what you teach and include in your curriculum, why is it more important for you to teach a lie with Betsy Ross than to teach the truth with Daniel Hale Williams? And that's how we are failing our young people in education, because they have no feeling for their net worth. When they pick up a book and the only persons they can read about in that book are Europeans and white folks. When we tell them about the Aztecs and the Mayans, and we don't tell them that the Olmecs were responsible for the civilizations of the Aztecs and the Mayans. So when those young black children, those young black boys and girls, those young teenage students cannot pick up a book and include images and the names of folk who look like them, then the playing field is unleveled and it's uneven, and it will continue to be so until we decide to teach the truth in the classrooms. Well, Mr. Hirsch, you know, that's what we require in the curriculum. It is your requirement, school teacher, college professor, doctor, to teach a lie. Is that what we're doing in public education today, in charter schools today? And I call charter schools segregation academies, but that's another conversation. We have to teach a lie and not tell the truth, and that's what we do. An incomplete, dishonest, and a racist American history. But that's what we have to deal with. And we have to deal with that because we don't understand what is needed in dealing with our young people. The news media blacked out all news about Axe Handle Saturday and the sit-ins. Mr. Pearson also said to us in his classroom, freedom is not free. If you're not a part of the solution, then you are a part of the problem. And he encouraged us to join the Youth Council NAACP. And I did at age 11. That was 65 years ago. At 15, I became president of the Youth Council, and at 16, in 1960, we started sitting in at downtown lunch counters, because understand that downtown stores then wanted you to spend your money in their stores, but only where they wanted you to spend your money. So you can buy goods at any of the department stores then, but you couldn't go over to that heretofore white lunch counter. And we said that was insulting. So the title of my book, It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke, simply means that we did not sit in to eat a sandwich and drink a beverage. We sat in because of human dignity and respect. And those lunch counters were visible vestiges to dramatize our opposition to segregation and racism at that time. You can't do a study on the sit-ins in Jacksonville. You cannot go to the news media, the television stations then, and the newspaper then, and find out anything about Axe Handle Saturday, because the news media, the white news media, made a conscious decision to black out all news about the sit-ins. The black press throughout the civil rights movement, Jet Ebony, the Pittsburgh Courier, here in Jacksonville, the Florida Press, the Chicago Defender, the Amsterdam News, they brought the story about the sit-ins to the American public. It was not white reporters who did not have the insight, did not understand the philosophy of sit-ins and nonviolence then, did not understand protesting and demonstrating for who you are and your birthright as an American citizen. So the press in Jacksonville blacked out all news. So after 2 weeks of sitting in, on that Saturday after we started, 2 weeks to the day, we were attacked by 200 whites with axe handles and baseball bats. The Klan had a meeting prior to that Saturday in a downtown hotel. And in that meeting, they decided they were going to start a race war. And we found this out 40 years later from an FBI informant who told me that he wrote up the report, gave it to his FBI handler. He was an informant with the Klan for the FBI, gave it to his handler, telling them what was going to happen. The handler put the report on the sheriff's desk of Duval County. And that report we later found out, or he later found out, was intercepted by one of the sheriff's lieutenants at that time, who was a member of the Klan. Also found out 40 years later that the National Guard was on standby. They were on standby in St. Augustine. They were on standby in Camp Blanding. And we did not know that. And we did not know that in addition to the fact that there were no police in downtown Jacksonville to protect and serve. It was not until blacks heard in the Black Business District, which was about 4 or 5 blocks from downtown, what was happening downtown to the Youth Council, NAACP, and they started making their way downtown. Then police came from everywhere and blocked off downtown. That history is not taught. Black history is not taught. Civil rights history is not taught. And every time I make a presentation, I have to say to young folk, tell me something about Rosa Parks. Well, Mr. Hurst, Rosa Parks got on the bus and she was so tired, she just sat in the first seat she could sit in. And don't you ever tell anybody that again. Rosa Parks sitting in a white seat in a segregated section of a Montgomery, Alabama bus had nothing to do with spontaneity. That was planned. And it was planned with E.D. Nixon, one of the real unsung heroes of the civil rights movement in Montgomery, who was president of the NAACP branch and also president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And the NAACP wanted to get that case into court because they knew when she sat there, she would be arrested. Even though Black folk boycotted the buses for 381 days, whites had really dug in. So the integration of the buses in Montgomery did not come about because of the boycott, even though the boycott showed perseverance on the part of Black folk and that togetherness. But it came about because the United States Supreme Court in 1956 threw that case out and the segregated law of Montgomery, Alabama as unconstitutional. But again, we don't teach that.
Uncle Rodney, we want to make sure that we provide some time for Q&A because I know these folk have some questions for you. Roxy, would you like to facilitate that for me?
Yes, there are a lot of questions. I'm going to try to.
While you're looking for that, I do want to make sure that I extend an invitation to everybody on the call to the 60th commemoration for Axe Handle Saturday, which is going to take place on August 27, 2020 in Hemming Park here in Jacksonville, Florida, from between the hours of 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock. And you'll be able to access all of this information via axehandlesaturday.com. So I wanted to make sure I extended that invitation, and that's going to be the same day that Donald Trump will be giving his acceptance speech here in Jacksonville as well.
And one other thing, when Rudy introduced me, he said that my third book is titled Never Forget Who You Are, Conversations About Racism and Identity Development. Rudy did not say that he is the co-author of the book with me.
Mm.
Roxy, you mind if I show that title?
Do you have that? You don't have the cover?
Yeah, I got the cover. Here it is.
Or are you? All right.
So this should be available next month.
And everything will be available. One of the main landing spaces that you will be able to go here very soon is you will be able to get to Axe Handle Saturday and get all the information that you need. You'll be able to go to that website. Everything for Dr. Jameson, Dr. Jansen, as well as Mr. Hurst. We are doing some things to make sure we get the information out to you. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Hurst, can I share the flyer of what you will be doing tomorrow? And you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, tomorrow I am participating in a virtual statewide town hall sponsored by the Florida Democratic members, the Democratic members of the Florida Congressional Delegation. It's going to be anchored by Attorney General Eric Holder and Dr. Charles Ramsey, and it will include Leon Russell, who's the chairman of the NAACP Board of Directors, Attorney Benjamin Crump, Tracy Davis, and I have been honored to be one of the participants. So we will talk about what's happening in this country, part history of what is happening, where we are going, understanding that there are no formulas for making America whole again. And that's something that white folk are going to have to work on themselves too.
All right, we actually, Rudy, Dr. Jameson, I think everything was a little, I think everybody, Mr. Hurst, was extraordinarily captivated as they listened. So I think that we got more chats than questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we got more chats. I mean, we have extraordinary chats. I know the conversation will be continued. I know that and I want to honor Dr. Kelly and the task force and the time. And so we'll, the chairman of the task force is going to kind of close out, and that's, he's going to say some words, and I know he has some powerful words to say, but thank you, Mr. Hurst and Dr. Jansen, and I'm sure that Senator Hill will have some words. And Dr. Jameson, thank you very much. I'll let you close out your piece.
Yes, yeah.
And we'll,
so I just want to reiterate the importance of those 3 developmental domains, right? When we talk about development of self and building a degree of connoisseurship in your space, people like Rodney Hurst and people like Chris Jansen can't be mentors and sponsors to everybody. So it's extremely important for you to make sure that your connoisseurship, that your personal mastery, that your 10,000 hours are bringing value to whoever you are signaling to be your mentor or sponsor. And then you have a moral responsibility to share that information, to share those resources, and to share those relationships with other people. And that's the advocacy component. Development of self, developmental networks, and advocacy are critical to African-American history's implications on civic engagement, particularly for our youth. Thank you all for your time, and I truly enjoyed it, and I look forward to the work with you.
Thank you, Dr. Jameson. Senator Hill, are you ready? We're going to introduce a man in his own right that's doing a great deal of amazing things, has done amazing things in this state, is part of the historical fabric of this task force, along with the Dr. Kelly, who has been the brainchild. And I'm going to introduce Senator Hill to make closing comments to close out the Institute. And then I will follow him with some closing announcements and important next steps. Again, thank you, Dr. Jameson, Dr. Jansen, and Mr. Hurst. Senator Hill. Camila, we got Senator Hill coming on. Okay, I'm sure they're getting that. I'm sure they're getting that.
Yes, unmute.
Okay, they're getting that together again. If you're interested in gaining more, and Camille's taking care of getting Senator Hill on. If you're interested in getting more information, being a part of this amazing day, August 27th. And people from all over the country will be here. And most certainly, we invite you from the state, and then even bringing students, because again, this is all about how do we impact the learning and the education of the young people in our state. How do we ensure that African American history and civil rights history is embedded in the curriculum, in the very fabric of our educational systems here in the state of Florida and America. Senator Hill is ready now.
Hello.
Hey, Senator Hill.
How you doing?
Good.
Good morning. As we get a little closer to good afternoon, but first of all, as Dr. Kelly liked to say, ashe on all the speakers. Today was another mountaintop experience as it relates to African American history here in the state of Florida. I noticed in some of the chats, Roxy, that they wanted to see that town hall meeting again come up. So if you could flash that on for them, virtual town hall meeting tomorrow, June 18th at 6:30. Facebook, watch it live. Those are some great speakers with Congressman Haston, who has been a civil rights stalwart in his own right here in the state of Florida, will be on that panel too. So good to hear. I was on the phone earlier with Congressman Lawson when he mentioned to us that our good friend Rodney Hurst would be on the panel along with Representative Tracy Davis. So, but to finish up with this powerful institute, this is probably one of the most successful institute that we've had in the last 5 or 6 years. Very empowering, very power-packed. The information was just awesome. I would really say to all the participants who signed up, please reach out to Dr. Jameson to get those 2 books, because they are must read. Not About a Coke and a Hot Dog. And if we don't tell the story, who will? I mean, both books are just awesome. I've read both of them, and I look forward to the new book as it comes out soon. Let me just close in saying to and challenge each one of the teachers to please send us a lesson plan that you will develop from this institute. Send that to us this year so we can in turn pass that on as we go into these school districts when they ask us questions, how do we infuse African American history? A little over almost 25 years ago, we instituted this in the state legislature, one of the few states in the country that mandate K through 12 African American history will be taught in the curriculum. So it's Sunshine Standards, all that is a part of it. And we really challenge you to take what you've learned, take it back, as Dr. Alston said, and some of the other speakers that talked about curriculum, Marion, and just take this information back with you and use it and talk with people. You'll be surprised. Your direct instructor or your teacher, peer teacher, tell me you would like to institute this, and then quote the statutes, because it is a part of the Florida statutes, and it's just left up to you. And I want to close with this thought with you. It says, if you do the things you need to do when you need to do them, then someday you can do the things you want to do when you want to do them. And that's what we want to empower our young people now, to study the history of African Americans in the state of Florida who have made tremendous contribution. You've been hearing about Axe Handle Saturday 60 years ago. You've been seeing it all over the networks and stuff, where you had one of the principal people who participated in that sit-in speak to you today. That says volumes of what this institute has happened over these last 3 days. Again, Dr. Kelly, hats off to you. Also to Roxy, thank you for being indulgent with us to put this on. This is the first time we ever did this. This is the first time we ever had this many people participate. And we really look forward to you sending us something back in writing, saying, here's what I got. Here's a nugget that I got. And I took it to the classroom. We implemented it. And I guarantee you, when it comes to opportunities, we tell people all the time, there's not a talent deficit in our community. It's just an opportunity deficit. And if you present these opportunities, they will have all the talent they need. Thank you so very much for the opportunity. And thank you again for putting this together, Dr. Kelly, along with Roxy Hall and her staff. Thank all our board members who participated in this program. And we look forward to better and better communications throughout the state of Florida. And some of the teachers who are not in exemplary status school districts, please let us know. Give us a call. We'll love to come in and get you going. Again, thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Senator Hill. Thank everyone that's been a part of this. And you know what? We're going to make each other a little accountable. Senator Hill told us that he wanted us to put in writing the things that we're going to take back or that we did and started implementing and let us know. But I'm going to charge you to chat about it right now. What you intend, something that you intend to implement immediately upon going back into your classrooms or going to get prepared for your lesson plans or as you go through additional PD, some of the things, as Senator said, that you intend to do to utilize the information that you've gained from this experience. It wasn't enough to just be here. What are you going to do? So start chatting about what you intend to do. And remember, we're going to record all of these chats that we have as they come in so that you will be able to look back on them. Now, there are some very important things, some very, very important information that we want to share that Dr. Kelly wanted to ensure that everyone that you get. First of all, we want everyone to stay connected. We want you to understand that your app will be available for minimally 6 months and we're trying to get that extended even longer, but continue the conversations. Continue the relationships that you have built, because together we are so much more than we are by ourselves. And so if we connect together, people who have like minds connecting together, we are not easily broken and we can encourage one another. Everyone who participated, and we have been noting your participation by your signing in each day. Everyone who participated in this virtual institute will receive an electronic certificate. You also have the availability with your district to receive CEU credits and points. So you have that ability. You will have to, of course, work very closely with your district and our team to ensure you get what you need from us in order to get those points. And then as Dr. Akua intonated on his call yesterday, you all will receive a PDF copy, a link of Dr. Akua's book, Transformation for Education. So again, that is primarily and we have to thank Dr. Kelly and the task force for that amazing gift. I think I covered everything. If I didn't,
excuse me. Y'all, it is so important that you guys fill out the surveys. There are actually 2 links that I need everybody to click on today. Those 2 surveys combined shouldn't take you any longer than 6 minutes to do. But there's one link, and I believe that it has been uploaded to the website, if I'm not mistaken.
It's on the website and the app, Dr. Oliver. It's at the top of the website, and it's also within the app.
Great. So there's a link for day 3 sessions. I will like for you guys to fill that out. It's important that I include your feedback into my evaluations report. And also there's a link where I'm asking you to evaluate the conference in total. So it's 2 separate surveys today. Prayerfully, everything should work. I had a come to Jesus talk with SurveyMonkey. So I apologize for all the glitches earlier this week, but hopefully those 2 links should work okay.
All right, thank you, Dr. Oliver. Thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you for all of the participants that participated today. Again, You also will have the opportunity, and that is Dr. Oliver, Dr. Matayun, Dr. Austin, that is Senator Tony Hill, Dr. Jameson, Dr. Jansen, and of course, the prolific and powerful Mr. Rodney Hurst. We are honored to that you are participating with us on today. So thank you all so much for that. Remember, a couple of things. VSC is working to ensure, we have been working every day to ensure that we are getting everything to you in an efficient and professional way. So a lot of the background, a lot of the things that we need to get updated to the site, we plan to have the updated website with all of the documents, all of the recordings, information for you to get everything that you need will be on this site by the end of the week. Most of the stuff is there now. We had a couple of glitches with a few things, but everything as it related to information from this powerful session will be available on this website. And we've been getting a lot of questions about that. Now, if you have the app, you will receive a notification right away. So again, we encourage you. The task force invested a great deal in having that app for you. We encourage you to use it. We encourage you to download it. If you have not downloaded it to this point, you can again go back to the website to download the app. If there's nothing else from the task force, I just want to close by saying VSC has been honored to serve as your moderator. My business partner and I, Camille Wilson, it has been an extreme pleasure. We are a woman-owned, minority-owned company, and we work for clients across the country. But this has been an honor and a privilege to be a part because it's my heart. And I just thank you for giving us this opportunity. And as we have the opportunity to work with conferences and educators, and I have on my Synergy shirt today. We also have a women's nonprofit, synergize.com. I talked about that earlier. We have the opportunity to work with women across the country and to do some empowerment and things like that. And I always close out the same way. And as educators, something that's paramount in all that we do, and that's the ABCs. We can't do anything without the ABCs. And I want to close this experience, and I want you to think about these letters as you close out. Think about what letter resonates with you. Think about how you will utilize this philosophy in your life, because it's philosophically how I live my life. And these are what I call the ABCs to a synergized life, or just the ABCs to life. And with the A, we must accept the challenge. And I think we've all done that by even being here in the day. In the B, we have to be our best, the very best that we can be. With the C, we must combine our words into actions. We can't just talk about it. We got to be about it. And with the D, we got to dedicate our life to our dreams. I mean, this dream of equality, this dream of equitability, this dream that African-American history will be embedded into the curriculum of schools throughout this nation. And with the E, we have to expect little if we give little. If we want a lot, we got to do a lot. And with the F, we got to feel good about ourselves. And with the G, we just got to get going. With the H, we have to have an innovative mind. And with the I, we need to inspire somebody. With the J, we have to join the team. And with the K, we have to keep on keeping on. With the L, we got to let our light shine every day. And with the M, make every moment count. With the N, never say I can't. Never say I can't. And with the O, overcome your obstacles. They're gonna come. They are here, but overcome your obstacles. With the P, put your best foot forward. And with the Q, quit quitting. Look at Mr. Hurst. He's still going. Quit quitting. And with the R, run this race with patience. With the S, stand strong. With the T, trust. Trust in your teammates. And with the U, use your talents. With the V, value your time. Value every moment that you have. With the W, work, and work some more until your work is done. With the X, X-ray your own lifestyle. Where are you? And where do you need to be? With the Y, yearn. I mean, want it real bad. Yearn to achieve your goals and your ambitions. And with the Z, zealously be. zealously be the very best educator you can be. Thank you. Thank you to the task force. Thank you to all the participants. And we invite you to be a part of all that the African American History Task Force is doing in the state of Florida. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roxy Hall. You have been marvelous. And if you're in agreement with me, everybody, just put in the chat box, thank you and Ashe. You have been a marvelous moderator.
Thank you.
Camille, you have managed all this technology. And we thank everyone who has participated in this endeavor. Like Tony said, this has been our first time that we've done it virtually, but we will not be the last. Look forward towards more. I put in the chat box our websites. We have a YouTube channel. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter account. So we're looking for the connection. We need to keep keeping on. And thank you most of all, Rodney Hurst. You've been the giant that we're standing on and moving forward with. Have a great evening and the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. Good day.